Dr. Amara Johnson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Medical Tower, watching the city sprawl endlessly beneath her. The late afternoon sun painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and amber, but she barely noticed the beauty. Her mind was elsewhere, wrestling with a decision that would change everything she had worked for over the past 15 years. At 38, Amara had climbed every mountain that medical academia could offer. She held dual degrees in cardiothoracic surgery and biomedical engineering from Johns Hopkins, had completed her residency at Mayo Clinic, and spent the last 8 years building her reputation as one of the most innovative heart surgeons in the country. The offer letter on her mahogany desk represented the pinnacle of her career: Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, with a salary that would triple her current income and position her among the most influential medical professionals in America. Her assistant, Patricia, had been buzzing with excitement all week. "Dr. Johnson, this is it. This is what you've been working toward your whole life," she had gushed when the call came through. Patricia was right, of course. This was the dream job, the kind of position that opened doors to research grants worth millions, speaking engagements around the world, and the chance to pioneer surgical techniques that could save thousands of lives. But life, Amara had learned, rarely followed the neat trajectories that ambitious young medical students imagined for themselves. The decision that haunted her had nothing to do with surgical procedures or hospital politics. It was about Marcus Williams, a 43-year-old construction worker who had stumbled into her emergency department 3 weeks ago, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. Marcus wasn't her patient. She had been passing through the ED on her way to surgery when she heard the commotion. "We need cardio up here, stat," the resident had called out. But Amara was already moving toward the bay where Marcus lay on the gurney, his dark skin ashen with pain and fear. What followed was a textbook case of acute myocardial infarction complicated by cardiogenic shock. Marcus needed immediate surgery, but what made his case extraordinary wasn't the medical complexity. It was what Amara discovered about his situation while reviewing his chart. Marcus Williams had no insurance. He had been between jobs for 6 months, struggling to support his elderly mother and 2 teenage daughters on unemployment benefits and odd construction jobs that paid under the table. The hospital's financial department had already begun the process of transferring him to the county facility, where he would receive basic care, but nothing approaching the specialized treatment he needed to survive. Amara found herself drawn back to Marcus's bedside repeatedly over the following days. There was something about his quiet dignity, the way he apologized to the nurses for being a bother, the way his daughters held his hands and tried not to cry where he could see them. His mother, a woman in her 70s who cleaned offices at night to make ends meet, sat by his bed during the day, whispering prayers and stroking his forehead. "Doctor, is my boy going to be okay?" she had asked Amara during one of her visits. The question was simple, but the weight of it settled on Amara's shoulders like a lead blanket. The truth was complicated. Marcus needed a series of surgeries that would cost upward of $300,000. He needed cardiac catheterization, possible bypass surgery, and extensive rehabilitation. Without insurance or the means to pay, his options were limited to whatever the overworked county hospital could provide, which, realistically, meant stabilizing him enough to send home with medications he couldn't afford and hoping for the best. Amara had seen this scenario play out countless times throughout her career. The American healthcare system, for all its technological marvels and skilled practitioners, had a cruel blind spot when it came to people like Marcus. She had learned early in her residency to focus on the medicine and let the administrators handle the finances. It was the only way to maintain sanity in a system that often seemed designed to test the limits of human compassion. But something about Marcus's case refused to let her maintain that professional distance. Maybe it was the way his 15-year-old daughter, Keisha, studied her textbooks in the hospital corridor, determined not to fall behind in school while her father fought for his life. Maybe it was how his older daughter, Jasmine, worked double shifts at a grocery store to help pay for gas money to visit the hospital. Or perhaps it was Marcus himself, who insisted on thanking every nurse and orderly by name, who asked about their families and remembered details about their lives even while connected to machines that monitored his own failing heart. The Northwestern offer had arrived 2 days after Marcus's case landed on her desk. Under normal circumstances, Amara would have accepted immediately. She had worked too hard and overcome too many obstacles to hesitate when opportunity knocked. Growing up in Detroit as the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, Amara understood the value of seizing chances when they appeared. Her mother, Rosa Johnson, had cleaned houses, worked at a laundromat, and stocked shelves at a grocery store to put Amara through school. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, Rosa had told her daughter countless times. You study hard, you work harder, and you never, ever turn down a chance to better yourself. Amara had followed that advice religiously. She had graduated valedictorian from high school, earned a full scholarship to the University of Michigan, and spent her 20s buried in medical textbooks while her friends went to parties and started families. Every sacrifice had been worth it when she walked across the stage to receive her medical degree, seeing her mother's tears of pride in the audience. Now, standing in her office with the Northwestern contract in hand, she felt the weight of her mother's sacrifices and expectations. Rosa was 72 now, living in a comfortable apartment that Amara's salary afforded, finally, able to rest after decades of backbreaking labor. Taking the Northwestern position would mean Rosa could have anything she wanted: travel, luxury, security beyond her wildest dreams. But accepting the job would also mean leaving Chicago immediately. Northwestern wanted her to start within 6 weeks, which meant abandoning her current patients, including Marcus Williams. Amara picked up the contract and read through the offer one more time. The salary was staggering: $1.2 million annually, plus bonuses and research funding. The benefits package included a housing allowance, car service, and a budget for continuing education that exceeded what many people earned in a year. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she cared about. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been among the first to congratulate her when news of the offer leaked. "Have you signed yet? This is incredible, Amara. You deserve this." Sarah was right. Amara did deserve this opportunity. She had earned it through years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, and personal sacrifices that most people couldn't fathom. She had performed over 2,000 heart surgeries, published 43 peer-reviewed papers, and trained dozens of residents who now practiced around the country. Her techniques for minimally invasive valve replacement had become standard protocol at major medical centers. The rational choice was obvious. She should sign the contract, serve out her notice period, and move on to the next chapter of her career. Marcus Williams was one patient among thousands she had treated. The healthcare system's failures weren't her personal responsibility to fix. But, as Amara returned to the window, watching the evening traffic begin to thicken on the streets below, she found herself thinking about a conversation she'd had with Marcus 2 days earlier. She had stopped by his room to check on his progress, expecting a routine follow-up visit. Instead, she found him sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had since his admission. His daughters were there, along with his mother, and they were talking quietly about plans for his recovery. "Dr. Johnson," Marcus had said when he saw her, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Keisha here was telling me about how you stayed late last night to check on my test results." Amara had felt a flush of embarrassment. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her after-hours visits to the cardiac unit. "It's my job, Mr. Williams. I want to make sure you're getting the best care possible." "No, ma'am," Marcus had replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been in hospitals before, and I know the difference between someone doing their job and someone who cares. You care, and that means something to my family and me." His mother had nodded emphatically. "My son's right, doctor. You've been an angel to us. I don't know how we can ever repay you for your kindness." The conversation that followed had revealed more about Marcus's character than any medical chart could capture. Despite his own dire circumstances, he spoke mainly about his daughter's futures. Keisha wanted to study engineering, and Jasmine dreamed of becoming a teacher. He had been working extra hours before his heart attack, saving money for Keisha's college applications, and trying to help Jasmine finish her education degree. "I'm not asking for miracles, doctor. Marcus had said quietly, while his daughter stepped out to get coffee. I know my situation isn't ideal, financially speaking, but if there's any way to give me enough time to see my girls graduate, to know they're going to be okay, that's all I'm asking for. The rawness of that request had stayed with Amara long after she left his room. Here was a man facing his own mortality, worried not about himself, but about the children he might leave behind. It reminded her of her own mother's fierce determination to provide for her family, regardless of the personal cost. That night, Amara had done something she hadn't done in years. She researched Marcus's case not as a doctor, but as someone trying to understand the full scope of his situation. What she found was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Marcus had been steadily employed for over 20 years before a construction accident injured his back. Workers' compensation had covered his initial treatment, but when he couldn't return to full duty, his employer had gradually reduced his hours until he was essentially forced to quit. He had spent months trying to find work that accommodated his physical limitations while caring for his mother, who had developed early-stage dementia. The healthcare system's failures in Marcus's case weren't abstract policy problems. They were deeply personal tragedies that rippled through an entire family. His mother couldn't understand why he was sick and grew agitated when he wasn't home. His daughters were sacrificing their own futures to support the family, working instead of focusing on their education. Amara spent the night calculating costs and considering options. The surgery Marcus needed was within her expertise, but the financial obstacles seemed insurmountable. The hospital's charity care program had a 2-year waiting list. Medical debt forgiveness programs required paperwork and approval processes that could take months. Meanwhile, Marcus's condition was deteriorating daily. By morning, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Northwestern's chief administrator and requested a meeting. Dr. Elizabeth Hampton, who had recruited Amara personally, agreed to see her that afternoon. I need to discuss the timeline for my start date, Amara had said when she arrived at Northwestern's executive offices. Dr. Hampton smiled warmly. Of course, we're flexible within reason. Is 6 weeks not enough time to wrap up your current obligations? Actually, I need to discuss something more significant than timing, Amara replied. I have a patient who requires immediate surgical intervention, and I'm the only surgeon in the city with the specific expertise his case requires. Dr. Hampton's expression shifted slightly. I see. And this patient's care can't be transferred to another qualified surgeon. It could be, but not with the same likelihood of success. His case involves complications that I've dealt with extensively in my research. Another surgeon might be able to perform the operation, but the outcome would be significantly less certain. The conversation that followed was diplomatically phrased but brutally honest. Northwestern had invested considerable time and resources in recruiting Amara. They had turned down other candidates, restructured their department hierarchy, and made promises to their board about the improvements her leadership would bring. Postponing her start date for one patient, regardless of the circumstances, would be viewed as a lack of commitment to her new role. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Hampton had said carefully, I understand your dedication to patient care, and it's one of the qualities that made you our top choice. But you have to understand that thousands of patients will benefit from your leadership here. Sometimes difficult choices have to be made for the greater good. Amara understood the logic perfectly. It was the same calculation she had made countless times throughout her career, weighing individual needs against broader obligations. The rational choice was to transition Marcus's care to another surgeon and move forward with her plans. But sitting in Northwestern's gleaming conference room, surrounded by awards and photographs of the hospital's success stories, Amara found herself thinking about something her mother had told her years ago. Baby, Rosa had said after Amara's first year of residency, when the pressure and exhaustion had left her questioning her career choice. Being smart is a gift, but being good is a choice. You can be the most skilled surgeon in the world, but if you forget why you started doing this work in the first place, all that skill won't mean much. At the time, Amara had dismissed the comment as her mother's tendency toward sentiment. Rosa hadn't gone to college, didn't understand the complexities of modern medicine, and sometimes offered advice that seemed overly simplified. But now, faced with the biggest decision of her professional life, Her mother's words resonated with unexpected clarity. Amara had become a surgeon to save lives, not to build wealth or gain prestige. Those things were pleasant byproducts of success, but they weren't the reason she had spent years learning to hold human hearts in her hands. She left Northwestern without signing anything, promising to give them her final answer within 24 hours. That evening, she visited Marcus again. His condition had worsened slightly. Nothing dramatic, but the kind of subtle decline that experienced doctors learn to recognize as a warning sign. Time was running out. "Mr. Williams," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I'd like to discuss your treatment options." Marcus's eyes focused on her with effort. The medications were making him drowsy, but he struggled to stay alert for their conversation. "Doctor, I appreciate everything you've done, but I know the situation. My family and I have been talking, and we understand that there are limits to what's possible." "What if there weren't?" Amara asked quietly. "Ma'am, what if the financial obstacles weren't a factor? What would you want for yourself and your family?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to understand why she was asking such a question. "I'd want the chance to walk Keisha down the aisle someday. I'd want to see Jasmine graduate from college. I want to take care of my mama the way she took care of me and my girls when we needed her most." "That's what I thought you'd say," Amara replied. "Mr. Williams, I want to talk to you about a different kind of arrangement. What if I told you that I could perform the surgery you need, cover all the associated costs, and ensure you receive the best possible care throughout your recovery?" Marcus's mother, who had been dozing in the corner chair, stirred at the sound of their voices. "Doctor, did I hear you right?" "You did, Mrs. Williams. I'm proposing to personally fund Marcus's treatment." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief and confusion. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor, I don't understand. Why would you do something like that for us? We're strangers to you." Amara had been asking herself the same question all day, and the answer she'd reached surprised her with its simplicity. "Because I can," she said. "Because I have the skills to help you, the resources to make it happen, and because sometimes the most important decisions we make aren't the ones that make sense on paper." What she didn't tell Marcus, his mother, or his daughters was what this decision would cost her. The Northwestern position was gone. She had called Dr. Hampton that morning to withdraw her acceptance. The surgery and recovery costs would exceed $400,000, nearly wiping out her savings and forcing her to remain at her current position for years to rebuild her financial security. Her mother would have to wait longer for the comfortable retirement Amara had planned. Her own dreams of research funding and international recognition would be postponed indefinitely. The rational part of her mind cataloged these sacrifices with clinical precision, noting each opportunity lost and each goal delayed. But as she watched tears stream down Marcus's face, as she saw his mother clasp her hands in silent prayer, as she heard Keisha whisper to her sister that everything was going to be okay, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in years of professional achievement. She felt like herself again. The pre-dawn hours at Chicago Metropolitan Hospital carried a particular quality of stillness that Dr. Amara Johnson had grown to appreciate over her years in medicine. At 4:30 in the morning, the usual chaos of the medical center settled into a quieter rhythm. Emergency cases still arrived. Nurses continued their rounds. But the administrative bustle that defined daytime operations gave way to something more focused and immediate. Amara stood in the surgical prep area, methodically reviewing Marcus Williams's chart one final time before what would prove to be the most important operation of her career. 3 weeks had passed since she'd made the decision to fund his treatment personally, and those weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation, paperwork, and increasingly urgent medical management as Marcus's condition continued to deteriorate. The financial arrangements alone had required nearly a dozen meetings with hospital administrators, insurance specialists, and legal advisors. Amara had established a medical trust fund, transferred $200,000 from her personal savings, and secured a loan against her future earnings to cover the remaining costs. Her accountant had warned her repeatedly about the financial risks, but Amara had pressed forward with a determination that surprised even herself. More challenging than the money had been assembling the surgical team she wanted for Marcus's case. His condition had worsened since his initial admission, developing into what cardiologists called a widowmaker, a critical blockage in the left anterior descending artery that carried an extremely high mortality rate. The surgery would require not just her expertise in cardiac procedures, but the assistance of the best specialists she could recruit. Dr. James Chun, the hospital's leading cardiac anesthesiologist, had agreed to participate after Amara explained the case personally. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a perfusionist whose skill with heart-lung machines was legendary among Chicago's surgical community, had rearranged her schedule to be available. The supporting staff included two of the most experienced surgical nurses in the hospital and a resident, Dr. Kevin Martinez, whose steady hands and quick thinking had impressed Amara during previous operations. What none of them knew, except Amara herself, was that this surgery represented far more than one patient's treatment. She had bet her entire future on her ability to save Marcus Williams's life, and the weight of that decision pressed on her shoulders as she completed her final preparations. The call to Northwestern had been even more difficult than she'd anticipated. Dr. Elizabeth Hampton had been professional, but clearly disappointed when Amara explained her decision to withdraw her acceptance. "I hope you understand what you're giving up," Hampton had said during their final conversation. "Opportunities like this don't come along often, and there's no guarantee another position of this caliber will become available in the near future." Amara understood perfectly. She was walking away from financial security, professional prestige, and the chance to influence cardiac surgery on a national scale. In return, she was gambling everything on her ability to save one man whose family couldn't afford his treatment. Her mother's reaction had been even more complex. Rosa Johnson had listened quietly as Amara explained her decision over dinner 2 weeks earlier, asking only occasional questions about the medical details and the financial implications. When Amara finished, Rosa had been silent for several minutes, staring out the window of her apartment at the city lights below. "Mama," Amara had finally asked, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Rosa had said slowly, "about the night you were born. The doctor who delivered you was this old white man who'd been practicing for 40 years, and after you came out, he looked at you and said something I've never forgotten." "What did he say?" "He said, 'This little girl is going to change the world someday.' I always thought he meant you'd be famous, you know, rich and important. But sitting here listening to you talk about this man and his family, I think maybe the doctor was right in a way I didn't understand back then." Rosa had reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Baby, I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. But I'm prouder of who you are, and what you just told me about this decision shows me that all those years of work and sacrifice led you exactly where you were supposed to be." Those words had sustained Amara through the difficult weeks that followed, as she navigated the complex logistics of Marcus's treatment while watching his condition slowly worsen. By the time they scheduled his surgery, his ejection fraction, the measure of how well his heart was pumping, had dropped to 25%, well below the normal range and indicating severe heart failure. Now, at 5 in the morning on the day of the operation, Amara felt the familiar combination of nerves and focus that preceded every major surgery. But this case was different from the thousands she had performed before. This wasn't just about demonstrating her surgical skill or advancing medical knowledge. It was about validating the most important decision she had ever made. She made her way to Marcus's preoperative room, where she found him awake despite the early hour. His daughters were there, having spent the night in the family waiting area, and his mother sat beside his bed, holding his hand and humming softly under her breath. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," Amara said, settling into the chair she had occupied for dozens of conversations over the past 3 weeks. "How are you feeling?" Marcus managed a weak smile. "Nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, if you want the truth. But ready to get this done." Over the weeks of his hospitalization, Amara had come to know Marcus and his family in ways that went far beyond the typical doctor-patient relationship. She had learned that he was an accomplished woodworker who built furniture in his garage during his spare time. His daughters had inherited his craftsmanship skills. Keisha built intricate model bridges for her engineering projects, while Jasmine created detailed lesson plans for the children she tutored in their neighborhood. Marcus's mother, despite her advancing dementia, had moments of startling clarity during which she shared stories of raising 5 children as a single mother in 1970 Chicago. She had worked as a seamstress, taking in alterations and custom work to support her family, often staying up until dawn to meet deadlines while her children slept. "Doctor," Marcus said quietly, while his daughters stepped out to speak with the nurses, "I need to tell you something before we do this." "Of course. I've been thinking a lot about why you're doing this for us. I know you've told us it's because you can, but I think there's more to it than that." Marcus shifted in his bed, the effort clearly taxing his weakened system. "I think you see something in our family that reminds you of your own story. Jasmine told me about your mama, how she worked multiple jobs to put you through school." Amara felt a surprise at how perceptive Marcus was, even in his current condition. She had shared some details of her background during their conversations, but she hadn't realized how carefully he'd been listening. "I want you to know," Marcus continued, "that whatever happens in there today, what you've done for us has already changed our lives." Keisha's been different these past weeks, more confident, like she finally believes she can really become an engineer. And Jasmine's been talking about graduate school again for the first time in years. "Mr. Williams, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I also want you to know that if something goes wrong today, if I don't make it through this, I don't want you carrying any guilt about your decision. You've given us the gift of hope, and that's more than we had before." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the surgical team, ready to begin the transport to the operating room. As they prepared to move Marcus from his bed to the surgical gurney, his mother stood and approached Amara. "Doctor," she said, her voice clearer and more focused than Amara had heard it in weeks, "I want to give you something." She pressed a small object into Amara's palm, a worn silver cross that had clearly been treasured for many years. "This was my mother's, and her mother's before that. I've carried it through every difficult time in my life, and I want you to have it with you today." Amara started to protest, but Mrs. Williams closed her fingers around the cross. "Please, let our family be with you in there, even if we can't be there in person." The operating room at Chicago Metropolitan had been Amara's second home for 8 years, but as she entered it that morning, everything felt different. The familiar sounds of monitors and equipment preparation, the precise movements of the surgical team, the controlled atmosphere of focused concentration, all of it carried additional weight because of what this operation represented. Dr. Chen approached her as she began her final preparations. "Amara, I've reviewed the case again this morning, and I want you to know that if anyone can pull this off, it's you. But I also want to make sure you're going into this with realistic expectations. What are you thinking? His condition has deteriorated significantly since admission. The blockage is more extensive than we initially realized, and his heart function is severely compromised. Even with perfect execution, we're looking at maybe 60% odds of survival, and that's being optimistic." Dr. Chin's assessment aligned with Amara's own evaluation, but hearing it stated so bluntly reminded her of the enormity of what she was attempting. She had risked her entire future on a procedure that, by any objective measure, was more likely to fail than succeed. "James," she said quietly, "do you think I'm making a mistake?" Dr. Chun was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Professionally, this is one of the most challenging cases I've seen in 20 years of practice, and the financial risk you're taking is beyond anything I would consider reasonable. And personally, I think what you're doing is exactly why I became a doctor in the first place, and I'm honored to be part of it." The surgery began at 6:15 a.m. with the precise routine that Amara had performed thousands of times before. The initial incision, the careful separation of tissue, the methodical exposure of the surgical field, each step executed with the muscle memory that came from years of training and practice. But as they approached the heart itself, the true scope of Marcus's condition became apparent. The damage was even more extensive than the preoperative imaging had suggested. Multiple vessels were involved, and the heart muscle itself showed signs of significant injury from the prolonged lack of adequate blood flow. "This is going to take longer than we planned," Amara announced to the team. "Dr. Rodriguez, how are we looking with the perfusion setup?" "Everything's stable," came the reply. "We can maintain him as long as you need." What followed was 4 hours of the most delicate and complex cardiac surgery Amara had ever attempted. The primary blockage required not just a bypass, but a complete reconstruction of the affected vessel. Two additional blockages that hadn't been visible on the initial scans required intervention. Each procedure built upon the previous one, creating a surgical symphony that demanded absolute precision and unwavering focus. Halfway through the operation, Marcus's condition began to deteriorate. His blood pressure dropped despite medication support, and his heart rhythm became increasingly irregular. For 20 minutes, the outcome hung in balance as Amara and her team worked to stabilize his condition while continuing the delicate repair work that his survival depended on. Amara, Dr. Chen said quietly during the most critical moment, his pressure's dropping faster than we can compensate. We need to make a decision about how aggressive to be. It was the moment every surgeon dreaded, the point where medical science reached its limits and difficult choices had to be made. They could continue the operation and risk losing Marcus on the table, or they could perform a less complete repair that might allow him to survive the surgery, but would leave him vulnerable to future complications. Amara looked at the monitors, at the heart she held in her hands, at the surgical field that represented not just Marcus's life, but the hopes of his entire family. In that moment, she remembered something her chief of surgery had told her during her residency. The difference between a good surgeon and a great one isn't technical skill. It's knowing when to push forward and when to step back. We're going to complete the procedure, she announced to the team. Dr. Rodriguez, increase the inotropic support. James, adjust the anesthesia protocol. We're going to give him the best possible outcome, whatever it takes. What happened next would be discussed in surgical circles for years to come. Through a combination of technical excellence, innovative problem-solving, and sheer determination, Amara's team not only stabilized Marcus's condition, but completed the most thorough cardiac repair any of them had ever witnessed. By 10:30 a.m., Marcus's heart was beating on its own for the first time in months with normal rhythm and adequate pressure. The bypass grafts were functioning perfectly, and the reconstructed vessels showed excellent blood flow. What should have been impossible had become reality through the collective expertise of the surgical team and Amara's unwavering commitment to her patient's survival. As they prepared to close, Dr. Martinez, the resident who had assessed the weeks following Marcus Williams's surgery, passed in a blur of careful monitoring, gradual progress, and moments of quiet triumph that reminded Dr. Amara Johnson why she had chosen medicine as her life's work. The operation had been successful beyond even her most optimistic projections, but cardiac surgery was only the beginning of a complex recovery process that would test both Marcus's determination and the strength of the bonds his family had built over years of supporting each other through difficult circumstances. Marcus spent the first 72 hours after surgery in the cardiac intensive care unit, connected to monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle change in his condition. Amara visited him multiple times each day, sometimes finding medical reasons for her presence, sometimes simply checking on a patient who had become far more than a case study in surgical intervention. On the third day post-surgery, Marcus opened his eyes with a clarity that hadn't been present since his admission 5 weeks earlier. The grayish pallor that had marked his skin during the worst of his illness had been replaced by healthier coloring, and when he spoke, his voice carried a strength that made Amara's heart skip with professional satisfaction and personal relief. Dr. Johnson, he said when he saw her reviewing his chart, I dreamed I could breathe again. How does it feel now that you're awake? She asked, moving to check his surgical incisions and monitor readings. Marcus took a careful, experimental breath, then another, like I've been underwater for months, and somebody finally pulled me to the surface. The comparison was more medically accurate than Marcus probably realized. His heart function had improved dramatically. His ejection fraction had risen from 25% before surgery to 48% post-operatively, well within the normal range. The bypass grafts were functioning perfectly, and the reconstructed vessels showed no signs of complications. By every measurable standard, the surgery had been a complete success. But Amara's commitment to Marcus and his family extended far beyond the technical aspects of his treatment. She had learned during her years in medicine that recovery from major cardiac surgery involved much more than healing tissue and restored blood flow. Patients needed comprehensive rehabilitation, careful monitoring for complications, and emotional support as they adjusted to significant changes in their physical capabilities and life circumstances. For Marcus, those challenges were complicated by the financial realities that had nearly prevented his surgery in the first place. Although Amara had covered the immediate costs of his treatment, the ongoing expenses of recovery, medications, follow-up appointments, rehabilitation services, represented a continuing burden that his family was ill-equipped to handle. Amara found herself developing creative solutions to problems that the healthcare system wasn't designed to address. She arranged for Marcus to receive his post-operative medications through a research program she was conducting, effectively providing them at no cost. She scheduled his follow-up appointments during her own research time, ensuring he received the specialized attention his case required without generating additional bills. Most significantly, she began working with the hospital's rehabilitation staff to develop a recovery program that Marcus could complete largely at home, with his daughters serving as trained assistants under Amara's supervision. It was an unconventional arrangement that required her to spend considerable time teaching Keisha and Jasmine basic medical monitoring techniques, but it allowed Marcus to recover in familiar surroundings while keeping costs manageable. 2 weeks after surgery, Marcus was discharged to home care with a level of preparation and support that even privately insured patients rarely received. Amara had equipped his apartment with monitoring equipment, arranged for visiting nurse services through a hospital program, and established a communication system that allowed his family to reach her 24 hours a day if complications arose. What surprised everyone, including Amara herself, was how much she enjoyed the intensive, personal approach to patient care that Marcus's case required. After years of managing large caseloads and focusing primarily on surgical interventions, she rediscovered the satisfaction that came from developing comprehensive treatment relationships with patients and their families. The transformation was evident not just in her professional approach, but in her personal perspective on what constituted meaningful medical practice. The Northwestern position she had abandoned had promised the opportunity to perform hundreds of surgeries each year, but those procedures would have been largely anonymous encounters, complex technical challenges with limited personal connection to the patients involved. Marcus's case reminded her that medicine at its best was deeply personal work, requiring not just technical expertise, but genuine commitment to understanding and addressing the full scope of patients' needs. His recovery became a collaboration involving not just medical professionals, but his entire family working together towards shared goals that extended far beyond mere survival. Keisha Williams, Marcus's younger daughter, proved to be especially gifted at the medical monitoring tasks Amara taught her. The 15-year-old approached her father's care with the same analytical precision she applied to her engineering projects, maintaining detailed logs of his vital signs, medication schedules, and exercise progress that impressed even the hospital's professional nursing staff. Dr. Johnson, Keisha said during one of Amara's home visits 3 weeks after the surgery, "I've been thinking about something you said about how the heart works like an engineered system." "What about it?" "Well, I've been watching Dad's recovery data, and I noticed some patterns that might be important. His heart rate varies in ways that seem to correlate with his sleep quality and stress levels. I made some charts that might help us optimize his recovery program." Amara examined Keisha's analysis and was astonished by its sophistication. The teenager had identified correlations between Marcus's emotional state and his physical recovery that had escaped the attention of the professional medical staff. Her charts suggested modifications to his rehabilitation schedule that could improve both his progress and his comfort level. "Keisha, this is remarkable work. Have you considered that medical research might be an interesting complement to your engineering studies?" "Actually," Keisha replied, "working with Dad's case has made me think about biomedical engineering. Maybe I could help design better monitoring systems or recovery protocols for heart patients." The conversation marked the beginning of an informal mentoring relationship that would prove significant for both Keisha's future and Amara's understanding of how medical care could be improved through innovative thinking and collaborative approaches. Jasmine Williams, meanwhile, had used her experience helping with her father's recovery to deepen her commitment to education. She had always wanted to be a teacher, But watching Amara explain medical concepts in ways that allowed the family to participate actively in Marcus's care had given her new insights into how complex information could be made accessible to diverse audiences. Dr. Johnson, Jasmine told Amara during a family meeting 6 weeks after the surgery, "What you've done for our family goes way beyond the medical treatment. You've shown us how to take control of situations that seemed impossible, how to learn things we never thought we could understand. I want to bring that same approach to my teaching." The progress reports from Marcus's recovery were consistently positive throughout the first 2 months after surgery. His heart function continued to improve, his exercise tolerance increased steadily, and he was able to return to limited work activities much sooner than anyone had projected. But, perhaps more importantly, the experience had transformed his family's approach to challenges and opportunities. Marcus himself had been changed by more than just the surgical repair of his heart. The months of illness had forced him to depend on others in ways that were difficult for someone who had always been his family's primary provider and protector. But the experience had also shown him the strength and capability of his daughters, and had deepened his appreciation for the importance of education and preparation in overcoming obstacles. Dr. Johnson, he said during a follow-up appointment 10 weeks after surgery, "I need to tell you about some changes Jasmine and Keisha have been making." "What kind of changes?" "Jasmine's been accepted to a graduate program in education at the University of Chicago. Full scholarship, based partly on an essay she wrote about learning to provide medical care for family members. And Keisha's been invited to participate in a summer research program for high school students interested in biomedical engineering." Amara felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with surgical success. "That's wonderful news. How do you feel about their opportunities?" "Proud as I can be," Marcus replied, "but also grateful in ways I don't know how to express. What you did for us wasn't just about saving my life. You showed my girls that they could handle anything, that they were capable of much more than they realized." The conversation reminded Amara of something she had been thinking about frequently during Marcus's recovery. Her decision to fund his treatment personally had been motivated primarily by immediate medical concerns, a patient who needed surgery that he couldn't afford. But the experience had opened her eyes to broader issues in healthcare delivery that her previous career focus hadn't required her to confront. The American medical system, despite its technological sophistication and the skill of its practitioners, was poorly designed to address the kinds of complex, multi-generational challenges that families like the Williamses faced. Marcus's case had required not just surgical intervention, but comprehensive support for his entire family, education and training for his caregivers, and creative financing arrangements that made quality care accessible despite his economic circumstances. Amara began to realize that her expertise could be applied to these broader challenges in ways that might ultimately help far more patients than even the most prestigious surgical position could reach. The intensive, personalized approach she had developed for Marcus's case could potentially serve as a model for treating other patients whose needs extended beyond purely medical interventions. She started documenting the strategies she had used in Marcus's care, analyzing the costs and benefits of different approaches, and developing protocols that could be adapted for other patients facing similar challenges. What began as careful record-keeping for one patient's treatment gradually evolved into something resembling a research project focused on innovative healthcare delivery methods. 3 months after Marcus's surgery, Amara received an unexpected phone call that would change the trajectory of her career in ways she had never anticipated. Dr. Robert Hendricks, the chief medical officer at the American Heart Association, had heard about Marcus's case through professional networks and wanted to discuss her approaches to patient care with underserved populations. "Dr. Johnson," Dr. Hendricks said during their initial conversation, "we've been hearing remarkable things about the work you've been doing with cardiac patients who face financial barriers to treatment. Would you be interested in discussing some opportunities that might allow you to expand that work?" The American Heart Association, Amara learned, had been struggling with the same healthcare delivery challenges that Marcus's case had highlighted. Despite advances in cardiac treatment that had dramatically improved survival rates for many conditions, those improvements remained largely inaccessible to patients who lacked adequate insurance or financial resources. "We're developing a pilot program," Dr. Hendricks explained, focused on creating comprehensive treatment models for underserved cardiac patients. We need someone with both the surgical expertise to handle complex cases and the innovative thinking to develop new approaches to patient care. Based on what we've heard about your recent work, you might be exactly what we're looking for. The opportunity Dr. Hendricks described was unlike anything Amara had previously considered. The American Heart Association was prepared to fund a 3-year research and treatment program that would allow her to work with patients facing financial barriers to cardiac care, developing and testing innovative approaches to treatment delivery, and training other medical professionals in techniques that could be replicated across the country. The position would provide resources to treat dozens of patients like Mark, who 6 months after Marcus Williams' surgery, Dr. Amara Johnson found herself standing in a conference room at the American Heart Association's headquarters in Dallas, Texas, addressing an audience of cardiologists, healthcare administrators, and policymakers who had gathered to hear about her innovative approach to treating underserved cardiac patients. The presentation she was about to give would mark a turning point not just in her career, but in the national conversation about healthcare delivery and medical equity. The invitation to speak had come from Dr. Robert Hendricks, following several months of collaboration between Amara and the AHA's research division. What had begun as informal discussions about Marcus's case had evolved into a comprehensive study of her treatment methods, with results that surprised even the most optimistic researchers involved in the project. Marcus Williams had not only survived his surgery and made a complete recovery. His case had become the foundation for a pilot program that was producing remarkable results across multiple measures of patient outcomes and healthcare efficiency. The success had attracted attention from medical institutions nationwide, healthcare policy experts, and federal agencies responsible for Medicare and Medicaid administration. Ladies and gentlemen, Amara began, looking out at the assembly of distinguished medical professionals. 6 months ago, I made what many of my colleagues considered a career-ending decision. I turned down the position of Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital to personally fund the treatment of a single uninsured patient. The audience was quiet, attentive. Many of them had heard elements of Marcus's story through professional networks. But this was the first time Amara had presented a comprehensive analysis of the case and its implications for broader healthcare policy. Today, I want to share with you what I learned from that decision and how one patient's treatment has led to discoveries that could fundamentally change how we approach cardiac care for underserved populations. The presentation that followed was based on detailed analysis of not just Marcus's medical outcomes, but the comprehensive approach to patient care that had evolved during his treatment and recovery. Amara and her research team had documented every aspect of their methods, from the intensive family education programs to the innovative financing arrangements that had made his treatment possible. The results were extraordinary by any measure. Marcus had achieved complete cardiac recovery 6 months ahead of typical timelines, with none of the complications that affected nearly 30% of patients undergoing similar procedures. His family's involvement in his care had eliminated the need for extensive professional home nursing services, reducing recovery costs by more than 60% while achieving superior patient outcomes. But the implications extended far beyond individual medical success. Keisha Williams, now 16, had completed her summer research program in biomedical engineering with distinction, earning recommendations from university researchers who described her work as graduate level despite her high school status. Her analysis of cardiac recovery patterns, based on her father's case, had been submitted for publication in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering. Jasmine Williams had begun her graduate program in education at the University of Chicago, where her research focus on medical education for lay caregivers was attracting attention from public health experts. Her thesis project, examining how family members could be trained to provide sophisticated post-operative care, was being funded by a grant from the Department of Health and Human Services. Marcus himself had returned to work full-time and was using his carpentry skills to build specialized furniture for cardiac patients recovering at home. His designs, developed in collaboration with occupational therapists, were being tested at 3 Chicago hospitals and had attracted interest from medical equipment manufacturers. The traditional model of cardiac surgery, Amara explained to her audience, focuses primarily on the technical aspects of the procedure itself. Patients receive excellent surgical care, but post-operative support is often fragmented, expensive, and inadequate for complex cases involving financial or social challenges. She clicked to a slide showing comparative cost analysis between traditional treatment approaches and the comprehensive model she had developed for Marcus's case. What we discovered is that intensive preoperative preparation, extensive family education, and personalized postoperative support actually reduces overall treatment costs while dramatically improving patient outcomes. The initial investment in comprehensive care pays for itself within 6 months through reduced complications, shorter recovery times, and decreased need for emergency interventions. Dr. Hendricks, who had been instrumental in supporting Amara's research, provided additional context during his introduction of the presentation. The American Heart Association had been searching for innovative approaches to the crisis in cardiac care accessibility. More than 650,000 Americans died from heart disease each year, with mortality rates significantly higher among patients who lacked adequate insurance or financial resources. Dr. Johnson's work with Marcus Williams and subsequent patients represents a potential solution to some of our most persistent challenges in cardiovascular medicine, Dr. Hendricks told the audience. Her methods don't just treat individual patients more effectively. They provide a framework for addressing systemic barriers to quality cardiac care. The pilot program that had grown from Marcus's case now included 12 patients across 3 Chicago hospitals. All were individuals who faced significant financial barriers to cardiac treatment, but who were receiving comprehensive care through the innovative funding and support model Amara had developed. The results were consistently impressive. Patient satisfaction scores exceeded 95%, compared to the national average of 78% for cardiac surgery patients. Recovery times averaged 32% faster than traditional treatment protocols. Most significantly, total treatment costs were 28% lower than conventional approaches, despite the intensive support services provided. The success had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services had expressed interest in potentially adapting Amara's methods for broader implementation in federally funded healthcare programs. Private insurance companies were studying her cost-effectiveness data to determine whether similar approaches might be beneficial for their covered patients. Medical schools were beginning to incorporate elements of her patient education and family training protocols into their curricula. The comprehensive approach to cardiac care that had evolved from Marcus Williams's case was being recognized as a potential model for treating not just heart disease, but a variety of chronic conditions requiring complex medical intervention and long-term recovery support. But perhaps the most unexpected development had been the response from the business community. Marcus's furniture designs for cardiac patients had caught the attention of several major manufacturers, leading to discussions about large-scale production and distribution. His experience as a patient had given him insights into the practical challenges of home recovery that professional designers had missed. The most remarkable aspect of this case, Amara told her audience, is how everyone involved became both a recipient and a provider of expertise. Marcus provided insights into patient needs that informed our treatment protocols. His daughters developed skills in medical monitoring and family caregiving that are now being incorporated into our training programs. His mother's experience managing care for someone with cognitive challenges helped us develop better support systems for elderly caregivers. The presentation included video testimonials from Marcus and his family, recorded at his apartment 6 months after surgery. Marcus appeared healthy and energetic, showing no visible signs of his previous illness. His speaking was clear and confident as he described his recovery experience and ongoing involvement in improving cardiac care for other patients. Dr. Johnson saved my life, Marcus said in the video, but what she really did was show my whole family that we were capable of much more than we realized. She didn't just treat my heart condition, she helped us discover strengths and abilities we never knew we had. Keisha appeared in the video as well, explaining her biomedical engineering research and her plans to pursue a career focused on improving medical devices for cardiac patients. Her confidence and articulation impressed the audience, particularly when she described complex medical concepts with the clarity of someone who had learned them through practical application rather than textbook study. Working with Dad's recovery showed me that engineering isn't just about building things, Keisha said. It's about solving problems that really matter to people's lives. I want to use engineering to make medical care better and more accessible for families like ours. The audience's response to the presentation was overwhelmingly positive, but several physicians raised questions about the scalability and replicability of Amara's methods. The intensive, personal approach she had taken with Marcus required significant time investment from medical professionals, and her willingness to personally fund patient care was not something that could be expected of other doctors. Dr. Johnson asked Dr. Patricia Williams, a cardiologist from Atlanta, "Your results are impressive, but they seem to depend heavily on your personal commitment of time and financial resources. How do you envision this approach being implemented more broadly without requiring individual physicians to make similar sacrifices?" The question addressed the central challenge that Amara had been grappling with as interest in her work grew. The success with Marcus Williams and subsequent patients was undeniable, but the methods required modifications to be practical for widespread implementation. "That's exactly what we're working on," Amara replied. "The pilot program we've developed incorporates the key elements of personalized care while distributing the workload among teams of healthcare providers rather than individual physicians." She explained how the comprehensive care model was being adapted to work within existing hospital systems and insurance frameworks. The intensive family education programs were being delivered by trained nurse educators rather than surgeons. The financial support mechanisms were being restructured to work through hospital charity care programs, government assistance, and private foundation funding rather than individual physician contributions. "The goal," Amara continued, "is to preserve the elements that make this approach effective: comprehensive patient preparation, extensive family involvement, personalized recovery support, while making it financially sustainable and operationally practical for broad implementation." The research data supporting these adaptations was preliminary but encouraging. Hospital systems implementing modified versions of Amara's protocols were seeing improved patient outcomes and reduced costs, even when the most intensive elements of her approach were simplified for routine use. Following her presentation, Amara was approached by representatives from several major medical institutions offering positions that would allow her to continue developing and implementing her innovative approaches to cardiac care. The opportunities included research funding, administrative support, and the chance to influence healthcare policy at national levels. But the most significant offer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Michael Chun, representing a consortium of medical schools and teaching hospitals, proposed creating an entirely new position that would allow Amara to establish a national center for innovative cardiac care delivery. Dr. Chun said during their private meeting after the Pres 1 year after Marcus Williams' surgery, Dr. Amara Johnson stood in the ballroom of the Chicago Marriott downtown, surrounded by nearly 500 healthcare professionals, community leaders, and patients whose lives had been touched by the innovative cardiac care program that had grown from one man's treatment. The American Heart Association's annual gala was celebrating not just advances in cardiac medicine, but the transformation of healthcare delivery that Marcus's case had inspired across the nation. Amara had been named the organization's Physician of the Year, an honor that recognized both her clinical excellence and her groundbreaking work in making quality cardiac care accessible to underserved populations. But as she prepared to accept the award, her attention was focused not on her own recognition, but on the remarkable changes that had occurred in the lives of Marcus Williams and his family over the past 12 months. Marcus sat at a table near the front of the ballroom, looking healthier and more vibrant than he had in years before his illness. Beside him sat his daughters, both of whom had achieved academic and professional successes that exceeded even Amara's optimistic projections for their futures. His mother, now receiving treatment for her dementia that had become possible through the family's improved financial situation, was having one of her good days and had insisted on attending to support the doctor who had saved her son's life. The story of how Marcus Williams had repaid Amara's sacrifice was more extraordinary than any medical journal could have documented. His recovery had been complete and remarkable, but the ways in which he and his family had contributed to advancing healthcare delivery had transformed not just their own circumstances, but the lives of hundreds of other patients across the country. Keisha Williams, now 17, had become the youngest person ever accepted into the joint MD/PhD program at Johns Hopkins University, where she planned to study biomedical engineering and cardiac surgery. Her research on patient monitoring systems, which had begun during her father's recovery, had been published in 3 peer-reviewed journals and was being implemented in cardiac care units nationwide. The monitoring protocols Keisha had developed allowed family members to track patient recovery with professional-level accuracy while reducing the need for expensive hospital-based follow-up care. Her innovations were saving healthcare systems millions of dollars annually while improving patient outcomes and family engagement in medical treatment. Dr. Johnson showed us that families could be partners in medical care, not just observers. Keisha had told a reporter from the American Medical Association Journal the previous month. What I learned helping with Dad's recovery convinced me that the best medical innovations come from understanding patients' real needs, not just their clinical symptoms. Jasmine Williams had completed her master's degree in education and was now directing a national program that trained family members to provide sophisticated home care for cardiac patients. Her curriculum, based on the education she had received during her father's treatment, was being used by 43 hospitals across 12 states. The program Jasmine developed had reduced post-operative complications by 37% among participating patients while cutting recovery costs by an average of 45%. More significantly, patient satisfaction scores increased dramatically when families were equipped to participate actively in recovery care rather than simply observing from the sidelines. What Jasmine has created, Dr. Robert Hendricks had told Amara during a recent planning meeting, is nothing short of revolutionary. She's proven that family members can be trained to provide care that's more effective and more compassionate than what we typically get from professional services. But perhaps the most unexpected development had been the success of Marcus Williams's furniture design business. His experience as a cardiac patient had given him insights into the specific challenges of home recovery that professional designers had completely overlooked. His custom furniture designs helped patients maintain comfort and mobility during the critical weeks following surgery. Marcus's company, Williams Cardiac Care Designs, now employed 15 people and had contracts with medical equipment manufacturers across the country. His furniture was being used in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and homes throughout North America. The business had generated enough income to secure his family's financial future while contributing to improved outcomes for thousands of cardiac patients. I never imagined that having a heart attack would lead to a career helping other people recover from the same condition, Marcus had said during a recent interview with Modern Healthcare magazine. But Dr. Johnson showed us that every challenge can become an opportunity if you approach it with the right perspective. The success of Marcus's business had allowed him to establish a foundation that provided financial assistance for cardiac care to families facing situations similar to his own. The Marcus Williams Heart Foundation had funded treatment for 37 patients in its first year of operation, using the same comprehensive care model that had been developed during Marcus's own treatment. The foundation's work was supported by profits from Marcus's furniture business, but also by an unexpected source. Amara herself had become a significant contributor, donating a substantial portion of her increased income from speaking engagements and consulting work that had grown from her innovative patient care methods. The relationship between doctor and patient had evolved into something approaching a business partnership focused on advancing cardiac care accessibility. Amara's medical expertise and Marcus's practical insights into patient needs had proven to be a powerful combination for developing solutions to healthcare delivery challenges. Their collaboration had caught the attention of the federal government. The Department of Health and Human Services had invited them to testify before Congress about healthcare innovation, and their recommendations were being incorporated into proposed legislation aimed at improving medical care for underserved populations. What Dr. Johnson and Mr. Williams have demonstrated, Senator Patricia Martinez had said during the committee hearing, is that the most effective healthcare solutions often come from partnerships between medical professionals and the patients they serve. Their work shows us how innovation happens when we focus on real people's needs rather than abstract policy objectives. The national recognition had created opportunities for both Amara and Marcus that neither had imagined possible 12 months earlier. Amara had been offered positions at major medical institutions across the country, along with research funding that would allow her to expand her comprehensive cardiac care model to serve thousands of patients annually. Marcus had been invited to speak at medical conferences, business schools, and innovation summits about his experience transforming personal health challenges into opportunities for helping others. His story had become a case study in business schools for how adversity could be converted into entrepreneurial success while maintaining focus on social benefit rather than purely financial gain. But the most significant recognition had come that evening, as Amara prepared to accept the American Heart Association's highest honor for physician achievement. The award was being presented not just for her surgical skills or research contributions, but for her demonstration of how personal commitment to patient welfare could catalyze systemic improvements in healthcare delivery. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Hendricks said as he introduced Amara to the gala audience. "This year's Physician of the Year award recognizes not just exceptional clinical achievement, but the courage to challenge conventional approaches to medical care when patient needs require innovative solutions." As Amara approached the podium to accept her award, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 12 months earlier, she had been preparing to accept what appeared to be the opportunity of a lifetime at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The decision to sacrifice that position for one uninsured patient had seemed like career suicide at the time. Instead, it had led to recognition, opportunities, and professional satisfaction beyond anything she could have achieved through conventional career advancement. The comprehensive cardiac care program that had grown from Marcus Williams's treatment was now being studied and implemented by medical institutions worldwide. "Thank you for this incredible honor," Amara said as she accepted the Crystal Award that represented the pinnacle of recognition in cardiac medicine. "But I want to be clear about something. The innovations we're celebrating tonight didn't originate in medical schools or research laboratories. They came from the wisdom and determination of a patient and his family who taught me that healthcare at its best is a collaborative effort between medical professionals and the people we're privileged to serve." She gestured toward Marcus's table, where he and his family were watching with obvious pride and emotion. Marcus Williams and his daughters, Keisha and Jasmine, have contributed more to advancing cardiac care than any research grant or academic appointment could have accomplished. They've shown us that patients aren't just recipients of medical care. They can be partners in innovation when we give them the opportunity and support they need to contribute their insights and abilities. The speech that followed outlined the expansion plans for the cardiac care program, including the establishment of comprehensive treatment centers in 20 major cities and the development of training curricula that would prepare thousands of healthcare professionals in the innovative methods that had evolved from Marcus's case. But Amara also used her platform to address the broader implications of what she and Marcus had accomplished together. Their success had proven that the most significant barriers to quality healthcare weren't technical or medical. They were financial and systemic obstacles that prevented capable people from accessing the treatment they needed. "The crisis in American healthcare isn't that we lack medical knowledge or surgical skills," Amara told the audience. "The crisis is that we've created a system where a patient's ability to pay determines their access to care, regardless of their need or our ability to help them." The solution, she argued, wasn't to lower standards of care or reduce the quality of treatment available. Instead, it required creative approaches that made comprehensive, high-quality medical care accessible to patients regardless of their economic circumstances. Marcus Williams received the same quality of cardiac surgery that any privately insured patient would have received at the most prestigious medical center in the country, Amara explained. "The difference was that we developed innovative approaches to financing, family education, and recovery support that made excellent care affordable and sustainable." The model they had created was now being adapted and implemented across the country, with funding support from federal agencies, private foundations, and healthcare institutions that recognized both the medical effectiveness and cost benefits of comprehensive patient care. As the evening concluded, Amara found herself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in her relationship with Marcus Williams and his family. What had begun as a straightforward doctor-patient relationship had evolved into a partnership that was influencing healthcare policy and improving treatment outcomes for patients nationwide. Marcus had repaid her sacrifice in ways that went far beyond financial compensation or professional recognition. His recovery had restored her passion for medicine. His family's contributions had advanced the field of cardiac care, and their collaboration had created opportunities to help thousands of patients facing similar challenges. But, perhaps most significantly, Marcus Williams had given Amara something she hadn't realized she had lost during her years of pursuing conventional career success: a sense of purpose that aligned her professional skills with her personal values and commitment to serving others. Standing in the hotel lobby after the gala, saying goodbye to Marcus and his family as they prepared to return to their transformed lives, Amara felt profoundly grateful for the decision she had made 12 months earlier. Turning down Northwestern Memorial Hospital to save one man's life had seemed like the end of her professional ambitions. Instead, it had been the beginning of work that was more meaningful, more impactful, and more personally satisfying than any position she could have achieved through traditional career advancement. Marcus Williams had indeed repaid her sacrifice, but not in ways that could be measured in dollars or professional titles. He had given her the opportunity to rediscover why she had become a doctor in the first place, and to use her skills in service of work that made a genuine difference in people's lives. The decision to save his life had saved her career in ways she never could have anticipated, opening doors to possibilities that were far more extraordinary than anything she had imagined when she first held his failing heart in her hands and chose compassion over conventional wisdom. As she drove home through the Chicago night, Amara smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities in the work she and Marcus Williams were building together. Work that honored both the science of medicine and the humanity of healing in ways that were transforming healthcare for everyone. In Tation, what you've accomplished with Marcus Williams and your subsequent patients represents a fundamental shift in how we think about medical treatment. We want to give you the resources to expand this work on a scale that could influence cardiac care nationwide. The proposed center would provide Amara with a research budget of $5 million annually, a staff of 20 healthcare professionals, and partnerships with medical institutions in 12 major cities. The position would allow her to treat hundreds of patients using her comprehensive care model while conducting research that could inform national healthcare policy. The salary and benefits package exceeded even the Northwestern offer she had turned down to help Marcus Williams. But, more importantly, the work would allow her to address the healthcare accessibility challenges that had motivated her initial decision to fund Marcus's treatment personally. As she flew back to Chicago that evening, Amara reflected on the extraordinary path her career had taken since that morning 6 months earlier when she had decided to sacrifice everything for one patient. The recognition her work was receiving, the opportunities being offered, the potential for national impact. All of it had grown from her willingness to risk her professional future on behalf of a man whose family couldn't afford his medical care. But, even as she considered the exciting possibilities ahead, Amara's thoughts kept returning to Marcus Williams and his family. Their success had made everything else possible, but their ongoing well-being remained her primary responsibility regardless of whatever new opportunities emerged. The flight gave her time to review the latest reports from Marcus's follow-up care. His cardiac function continued to improve, now measuring at 55% ejection fraction, actually above normal for someone his age. His work designing furniture for cardiac patients was expanding rapidly, with orders from medical facilities across the Midwest. Most importantly, he was able to be the father and son his family needed, providing support for his daughter's educational pursuits and care for his aging mother. Marcus Williams had given Amara far more than she had given him. His case had not only restored her passion for medicine, but had opened doors to work that could help thousands of patients facing similar challenges. The decision that had seemed like career suicide 6 months earlier was beginning to look like the most important choice she had ever made. What she didn't yet realize was that the most dramatic developments in her relationship with Marcus Williams and the impact of their story were still to come. Williams, while simultaneously conducting research that could influence national healthcare policy. The salary was competitive with what Northwestern had offered, but, more importantly, the work would allow her to combine her surgical skills with her growing interest in healthcare delivery innovation. Dr. Hendricks, Amara said after considering the proposal, "I'm very interested in learning more. But I should tell you that my approach to patient care has become quite personal and intensive. I'm not sure it would be easily scalable." "That's exactly what we're hoping to explore," Dr. Hendricks replied. "We want to understand what works about your methods, what can be adapted for broader use, and how the medical community can better serve patients who are currently falling through the cracks in our system." As Amara ended the call, she reflected on the unexpected path her career had taken since Marcus Williams first arrived at her hospital. The decision to sacrifice her Northwestern opportunity had seemed like the end of her professional ambitions, but it was beginning to look more like the beginning of work that could have far greater impact than any individual surgical position. Marcus's recovery had become more than a medical success story. It had become a proof of concept for approaches to healthcare delivery that prioritized comprehensive patient support over simply technical medical intervention. The experience had changed not just his life and that of his family, but Amara's understanding of what her expertise could accomplish when applied creatively and compassionately. The phone call from the American Heart Association suggested that others in the medical community were ready to explore similar approaches, and that Marcus's case might serve as the foundation for changes that could help thousands of patients facing similar challenges. But even as exciting professional opportunities began to emerge from her decision to help Marcus Williams, Amara remained focused on the ongoing reality of his recovery and the needs of his family. Whatever the future held, she was committed to seeing his treatment through to complete success, and to ensuring that the lessons learned from his case could benefit other patients who found themselves trapped between medical need and financial impossibility. Ted, throughout the procedure, spoke up quietly. "Dr. Johnson, I've been in surgery for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did in there." "We did," Amara corrected. "All of us. This was team surgery at its finest." But as she removed her surgical gloves and prepared to speak with Marcus's family, Amara knew that something fundamental had changed during those 4 hours in the operating room. She had proven to herself that the decision to sacrifice her Northwestern opportunity had been the right one, regardless of the financial cost or professional consequences. More importantly, she had rediscovered the passion for medicine that had driven her to become a surgeon in the first place. The prestige and salary of the Northwestern position suddenly seemed less important than the knowledge that she had used her skills to save a life that the healthcare system had been prepared to write off. Walking toward the family waiting area, where Marcus's mother, daughters, and a handful of friends had maintained their vigil throughout the surgery, Amara felt exhausted but deeply satisfied. She had no idea that Marcus Williams's recovery would soon open doors she had never imagined, or that her decision to sacrifice everything for one patient would ultimately lead to opportunities far greater than any position at Northwestern could have provided. For now, it was enough to know that she had bet everything on her ability to save a life, and won. The young woman who had decided to become a doctor after watching her grandmother die from complications that better medical care might have prevented. The medical student who had volunteered at free clinics instead of studying for board exams. The resident who had chosen challenging cases over prestigious assignments because they needed advocates more than recognition. Somewhere along the path to success, she had lost sight of that person. The Northwestern offer had seemed like vindication of all her hard work, proof that she had finally reached the summit of her profession. But, sitting in Marcus Williams's hospital room, promising to give up everything she had worked for to save one man's life, she realized that the summit she'd been climbing was the wrong mountain entirely. The real measure of her success wouldn't be found in salary figures or professional titles. It would be found in moments like this one, when skill and compassion combined to offer hope where none had existed before. As she left the hospital that night, Amara felt lighter than she had in years, despite the weight of the decision she'd made. Tomorrow she would begin the process of arranging Marcus's surgery, coordinating with financial departments, and restructuring her own life around this new reality. But tonight, she simply drove through the city she had chosen over prestige and opportunity, heading home to call her mother and explain why she had turned down the chance of a lifetime. She had no idea that Marcus Williams would soon repay her sacrifice in ways that would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others in ways she could never have imagined.